Hey guys, I've been a fan of the Nissan Silvia and 180SX for the longest time now. They were Nissan's entry-level sports car in the 90s and early 2000s. Unfortunately, these two cars were only available outside of the US, but we did get a diluted version of it here called the 240SX. I'm going to briefly go through the history of the Nissan Silvia just to provide a general idea of its timeline, specifically starting from 1989 since that's when its popularity arose, and only discuss about the Japanese and US market, as the other markets did receive them also in various forms. I'm not going to include any special models, features, and options, as there were many that came out during this time. I'll list the details in the photos and the chassis code in parentheses. Feel free to pause the video to review any information. The Nissan Silvia and 180SX was and still is a very popular car due to its rear-wheel drive configuration, great handling, parts interchangeability, and engine swap options. My first car was actually a black 1989 Nissan 240SX LE with the 91 front bumper. I'll explain the 91 bumper later in the video. It came with this ugly looking brown interior with beige leather that I did not like looking at. Fortunately, it came with a black dash cover too to cover it up. I didn't really know what a 240SX was at the time. I purchased it mainly for transportation and price and didn't realize what I had until I did further research. The Nissan Silvia's popularity started in 1989 as a coupe with fixed headlights. Its brother, the 180SX, was also introduced at the same time, but with pop-up headlights. As far as body styles go, the Silvia was a coupe and the 180SX was a fastback, which were available for the Japanese and international market. They both initially had the CA18DET, which was a 1.8-liter dual overhead cam turbo engine with a 5-speed manual or automatic. This is also where they got the 1.8 designation for the 180SX, in which they kept the name until the end of its production. The US received the 240SX as a coupe and fastback body style. They both had flip-up headlights and came with a 2.4-liter naturally aspirated single overhead cam named the KA24E with 140 horsepower, hence where we got the model name 240SX here. It wasn't as popular in the aftermarket as its dual overhead cam siblings. These years also had what enthusiasts refer to as the pig-nose front bumper, since it had these two nostril-looking features on it. Notice that the Japanese version with red arrow also has a hole below the front of the bumper to direct air into the intercooler on turbocharged models, while the US one in blue didn't. This comparison picture shows the differences between the Japanese and US models. The coupe's front ends are totally different while the fastbacks are similar. I'm not really a fan of the coupe's fixed headlights, but everyone has their own preferences. 1991 brought aesthetic changes to the Silvia and 240SX body style, which also includes the 180SX. Here's a picture of the two Japanese models side by side. The most noticeable aesthetic change was a revised front bumper for the fastback, which to me made the car look more sleek. The biggest change though was the introduction of the SR20DET engine for the Japanese market, also referred to as the red top. It was an all-aluminum 2-liter turbocharged engine using a T25 turbo, making 205 horsepower and offered with a 5-speed or automatic transmission. There were also naturally aspirated SR20 offerings. At this time, the US 240SX also received the revised front bumper for the coupe and fastback. Also, the single overhead cam was replaced by a dual overhead cam engine named the KA24DE with 155 horsepower and used for both coupe and fastback. I later bought a white 1991 240SX and preferred this front end to the 1989 and 1990 version. Having the dual overhead cam engine also gave you more options if you plan to do any modifications. There was also a convertible S13 Silvia and 240SX coupe sold at this time. It wasn't as popular because the chassis wasn't as stiff and it was heavier. The convertible top on the Japanese version was powered, while the US one was manual. The S13 240SX coupe and fastback were discontinued in 1994 for the US market. But the 180SX was sold in Japan until 1998, where it received several tweaks and aesthetic upgrades. I like these aero parts the best. It just makes the car look so much cleaner and more aggressive. The SR20DET remained the same, but the valve cover now became black in 1995, but also with no variable timing cam. I'll get to that in a second. 1995 introduced the S14 generation of the Silvia. It had a stiffer and wider chassis, but still had the same rear-wheel drive format as before. It did receive an updated SR20 DET, now with variable timing cam and a larger T28 turbo rated at 220 horsepower. Here's how you can distinguish between the S14 engine to the early S13 red top and later S13 black top. Just look for the VTC bulge in front of the intake side of the valve cover and hump towards the back of the motor shown here with the red arrow. You can see that the S13 red top in blue and black top in green do not have these features. The US also received the S14 240SX at this time, but with the K824DE engine as the previous generation. I currently own one of these, and you do notice the difference in refinement from the previous generation. The 1997 to 1998 Silvias received a revised front end, which looked more aggressive, and several other aero enhancements. I think this was the best look for the S14 because of its radical styling. The SR20 DET engine was reused with no changes. The 240SX received a similar treatment, but with a less aggressive front bumper and the same K824DE engine. I believe this was due to the safety and crash standards we have here in the US. Here's a side-by-side of the S14 offerings so you can see what the differences were year by year. The 1997 to 1998 version is very mean looking compared to the previous year's subtle look. 1999 introduced the last generation S15 Silvia. We never received this generation in the US. Our last one was the S14 240SX in 1998. This generation also received more chassis stiffening and several style offerings. The S15 Silvia still used the SR20 DET with variable timing cam, but now with 250 horsepower and a 6-speed manual transmission option. Nissan also offered a convertible called the Varietta, which had a power hardtop and a longer rear to accommodate the top. It was naturally aspirated and optioned with a manual or automatic transmission. This car just doesn't look proportional to me because of the rear, but it was nice to offer this as an option. I think the S15 with Spec R Aero package is the sexiest of all the Silvias. If only they sold them here in the US like this. I did have a 240SX Fastback with S15 Silvia conversion in the past, but it just doesn't stack up to the real thing. Here's an actual photo of it. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end as they stopped manufacturing the Silvia in 2002. Nissan did try to bring back the Silvia with several concepts and other entry-level offerings, but they didn't gain any interest. There was also the issue that they didn't have a performance 4-cylinder at the time, which would be capable of receiving the baton from the good old SR20. I don't even think they have one right now to think about it. We'll have to wait and see if Nissan plans to revive the Silvia or introduce an entry-level sports car in the near future. Well, that's a brief general history lesson for the Nissan Silvia. I know I could have elaborated on more things, but there were just too many special models, features, and gimmicks during this time, which tells you how popular this car was. Like and subscribe if you found this information useful, as I plan to get more videos out on a weekly basis. Leave any questions or comments in the section below. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.